Boom! Hag Sameach! How is everybody doing? I wanted to make it happen at least one time during this Sukkot festival. We are in the Sukkah. Welcome to the Litvak Sukkah. We just had a lunch here with some friends today. We're already into that twilight period. So where are we headed? We're going from the 6th day of Sukkot, into the 7th day of Sukkot tonight. Right? During our show, we'll be entering the 7th day of Sukkot here in Los Angeles. And what is the 7th day of Sukkot? It's Hoshana Raba. It's still one of the intermediate days of the festival. Hoshana Raba is not its own festival. Tomorrow night, Monday night, we'll be entering the 8th night of Sukkot, and as we learned, that is its own festival called Shmini Atzeret, and it's a 2-day festival outside of Israel. The second of those days acquired its own character, actually much later than biblical times, and that's called Simchas Torah, when we will celebrate not only the second day of Shmini Atzeret, but also coming to the end of our yearly cycle of reading the Torah and beginning it again. But as we enter tonight, it's Hoshana Raba. And Hoshana Raba, the 7th day of Sukkot, really is in many ways the end. Shmini Atzeret comes after, and of course it's connected to it, but this really is the end of the cycle of ritual that we began with Rosh Hashanah. We really began that a month before Rosh Hashanah, right? So a month before Rosh Hashanah, we're preparing for Rosh Hashanah and the days of awe from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. After Yom Kippur, we have 5 days to prepare for Sukkot, to build the Sukkah, to get our lulav and esrog. Then we celebrate Sukkot. Hoshana Raba is that last chance to sort of get our prayers through the door, through the crack in the door, under the crack in the door, into heaven, before the heavenly court, and asking God to sweeten the decree for all of us for the coming year. Also a time when specifically in an ancient biblical, the Holy Land as an agricultural place where everybody's depended so much on the land and the cycle and the weather, etc. Hoshana Raba is a time of praying for the rains that we will need so that we won't enter a drought and we will all be fed in the coming year. Now, how is it practiced in modern times? Hoshana Raba, a time of tremendous celebration. So tomorrow we'll be in synagogue. It's especially, for Carlebach minions who really do, sing in a very spirited way. Hoshana Raba is an intermediate day of the Sukkot festival, so you can have amplified music, for example, right? So at the Happy Minyan in Pico Robertson, where I might be tomorrow, I'm not sure, with the Moshav band playing, Yehuda Solomon leading the prayers of Hoshana Raba. Big festival, big singing, big dancing. Hoshana Raba celebrated with the 7 hakafas, walking around the room. I'm going to read just what we say during one of those hakafas, but with this big singing, and it can be amplified, and sometimes they have, electric guitars and amplified instruments, etc. Big celebration on Hoshana Raba, entering it tonight and then celebrating it tomorrow morning. Let's light up the darkness. I am so glad that we seem to be able to stream from the Sukkah. It was new system tonight, and we've been having trouble lately, but it seems to be working, thank God. Who's with us tonight? Who's with us in the Sukkah? Yehudit from South Carolina, Pauline in Arkansas, Stephen in New Hampshire, John in Maine, Paul in Chicago, Rebecca in LA, Belle in Texas, Adina in Texas, Gwen in Michigan, Melissa in New York, Sandy in the house from Michigan, Paula in the great Northwest, James in Indianapolis, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in Missouri, Hannah in the United Kingdom from Manchester. Must be late for you. Welcome to the Sukkah. So great to have you with us, Hannah. Nancy in North Carolina, Anissa in Oil City, Pennsylvania, Carolyn in Raleigh, Hannah wishing everyone a Hag Sameach. Bill says, hey, live from the Sukkah. David in South Bend. And that's all the cities that I see for now. Over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas, Gigi in British Columbia. Welcome, everybody. So it's going to be a short teaching from the Talmud tonight. I'll get to that in one moment. So I just thought I would read some of these Hoshanas for Hoshana Raba. Right? Hoshana, Hebrew, the Jewish people and Hebrew gave this word, sometimes pronounced Hosanna, I guess. But Hoshana means save us, please. Right? Hoshana, save us, please. So there's a lot that we'll say as we sing and dance tomorrow for Hoshana Raba. But the opening of the Hoshanas for Hoshana Raba, reading here from the Koren Machzor for Sukkot. It is the custom to leave the ark open, the ark, the Aron Kodesh, the cabinet in which the Sefer Torahs, the Torah scrolls are stored, until the end of the Hoshanas. All of the Torah scrolls are held on the beam, on the platform in front or in the middle of the room. Members of the congregation who have a lulav and esrog, the 4 species we've talked about, circle the platform 7 times while the Hoshanas are read. After finishing the first circuit, say, "For I said," and immediately proceed to make another circuit, saying the foundation stone, etc. We'll get to that in a moment. So the way it opens, the way Hoshanas will open in synagogue tomorrow, we'll say all this in Hebrew, but I'll do it in English for us. Hoshana, save us, please, for your sake, our God, save us, please. And the kind of advocacy here, as we're pleading with God to give us a sweet year, is, well, look, we're the people, who chant your name and proclaim your oneness and say, God is one in the world. So, let us continue to live and to prosper and to not be persecuted and to not, have such a drought that we're hungry and starving, etc. Save us for your sake so that we can keep proclaiming your oneness and your greatness in the world. Save us, please, for your sake, O God. Save us, please. Hoshana is save us, please. Hoshana, for your sake, our Creator. Hoshana, Hoshana, for your sake, our Redeemer. Hoshana. Hoshana, for your sake, you who seek us. Normally we think about we seek God, but God seeks us, right? A king can't be a king without a kingdom to rule, without a population to rule. So God seeks us so we can be in relation with him. Hoshana, for your sake, you who seek us, Hoshana. And then we do the Hoshanas in the first Hokafa. All this again would be in Hebrew, but I'll do it in English. Hoshana, for the sake of your truth, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your covenant, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your greatness and glory, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your law, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your majesty, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your promise, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your remembrance, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your love, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your goodness, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your oneness, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your honor, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your wisdom, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your kingship, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your eternity, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your mystery, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your might, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your splendor, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your righteousness, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your holiness, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your great compassion, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your presence, Hoshana. Hoshana, for the sake of your praise, Hoshana. Save us, please. Hoshana, for I said the world is built by loving kindness. So that whole unit was the first of 7 units, and while we're uttering those, we'll be circling around the room. It could be 20 people, could be 200 people, all circling around the room, carrying the lulav and esrog. Is incredibly beautiful, very inspiring. Tomorrow by the Western Wall, by the Kotel, thousands of people will be doing this Really, really beautiful. And then later in the day, later in that ceremony, we'll do the special practice that we only do on Hoshana Raba, where we'll take bunches of willow branches and beat those on the ground to kind of end this season of atonement. Very, very beautiful. And as we read in Tractate Sukkah, that beating of the willows is related to the carrying of the willow branches around the altar by the priests when the temple was standing. All right, let's get to today's daf. I'll just mention that to be in the sukkah tonight with you all, which I think is such a privilege and an honor, and I thank you for being here. I am getting bitten up by mosquitoes as we speak. Ooh, my ankles are getting crunched, like they're just one itch erupting after another. But okay, I will put up with the mosquitoes for you, my holy sisters and brothers. Okay, where are we holding? We are in Tractate Beitzah, the 8th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of festivals. We are in chapter 3. And we're talking about, as we sort of get a little bit further back from the point where you're allowed to prepare food on a festival. You're not allowed to do that on Shabbos. All the other laws are mostly the same. So we're allowed to do things that are related to food preparation, including slaughtering an animal, roasting the animal, kindling a fire to roast the animal, carrying the animal to the place of butchering, etc. But we are not allowed to trap the animal. We can't hunt the animal and trap it on the festival. That should have been done before the festival. That's the subject of this chapter 3. And now we're talking about, well, okay, so we can't trap it. We can capture it if it's already contained in a place where it's considered trapped. Okay, that's possible on the festival. But now we're also getting to the related ideas of muktzah. Was that animal prepared for use? Was it designated for use to be slaughtered, roasted, and eaten on the festival? Or did no one have it in mind to do that, and therefore that animal is muktzah, just like a hammer, which has no permitted use on the festival, so you can't even touch it. An animal that was not designated for eating on the festival, you can't even touch it. You can't do anything with it. It's muktzah. You should leave it alone. All right, now we begin Mishna number 4 here in chapter 3. We're at the bottom of the B side of page 25. A male firstborn of cattle, sheep, or goats that's belonging to a Jew is sanctified from birth, and it must be given to a priest to be sacrificed on the altar in the temple. This is called the bechor and the law of the bechor, the firstborn animal of the firstborn kosher animal of its mother's womb. Right. So the first, if the mother, a sheep, a cow, or a goat, right, or any other kosher animal, but we're talking about domesticated kosher animals. So we're really talking about cattle, sheep, and goats. So if the first offspring of that female is a male, then it's a bechor, and that's what we're talking about. If the firstborn is a female, then it's not considered a bechor, and it's just treated like any other cattle. So if the first one that comes out is a male, it's a bechor, and the owner of the mother, who now was blessed to have, this offspring on the farm that we should be able to eat, but you can't eat it, off limits. This, when the temple is standing, needed to be brought to the temple. It was given to the priests. Part of it went up on the altar. The rest of it was eaten by the priests and their families. If this animal is blemished, it has some kind of a blemish that disqualifies it from being offered on the altar, so then it cannot be offered on the altar, but nevertheless, it belongs to the priests, and it can only be eaten by the priests and their families, not by the owner. This only is for the firstborn male offspring of a domesticated kosher animal belonging to a Jew. If it doesn't belong to a Jew, doesn't have a bechor status. It just belongs to the owner, even if they're living in Israel, etc. Okay, if a firstborn animal acquired a physical blemish that disqualifies it from being sacrificed as an offering, it still must be given to a priest, but it may be redeemed, slaughtered, and eaten as non-sacred meat. right? It may be redeemed. So I guess the priest it belongs to the priest, but he can sell it, and now a non-priest could eat it because the sanctity of that bechor that only the priest could eat now was transferred to the money that somebody paid the priest for it. That money's sacred. The priest is going to have to, I guess, buy some other teruma that they can eat. If a firstborn animal fell into a cistern, a well, on a festival, and there is concern that the animal might die there, Rabbi Yehuda says an expert in these matters goes down into the cistern and examines the animal. If the animal has a permanent blemish owing to which it may be slaughtered and eaten, so now the owner may raise it from the cistern and slaughter it. But if it does not have a blemish, or if its blemish is temporary, then he may not slaughter it. Watch that. It said if the animal has a blemish, so it won't be fit for the altar. So it's going to be possible to go through a redemption process, and it could be slaughtered and eaten on the festival. So if it has that blemish, then they can raise it up out of the well, and then they can slaughter it and eat it. But only after an expert in these matters goes down in the well, examines the animal, and says, yes, it has a blemish that will render it unfit for the altar. If the animal fell in the well, but it did not become blemished in a way that would render it unfit for the altar, now he may not slaughter it. Right? He may not slaughter it is what it says. It doesn't say he may not raise it or slaughter. He may not raise it and slaughter it, like in the first case. With the blemish, he may raise it and slaughter it. Take it out of the well and slaughter it. Now it just says he may not slaughter it. Can he take it out of the well? We're not sure yet. Rabbi Shimon says, if it has a blemish, it is prohibited to slaughter it, as any firstborn animal whose blemish was not perceptible while it was still day, meaning on the day before the festival began, is not considered to be among the animals prepared prior to the festival for use on the festival. But the reason we're talking about this animal at all, it's a firstborn, okay? So if it had just been wandering around in its pen, we would know, okay, it's just going to keep wandering around in its pen during the festival. We can't eat it because it is sanctified. It needs to go to Jerusalem and be offered on the altar, or if it develops a blemish, it still needs to be given to the priests, and they're going to eat it or sell it as they wish. But it fell in the well, right? So now that's a special circumstance, and according to Rabbi Shimon, well, when did it fall in the well? It says it fell in the well on the festival, right? If an animal fell into a cistern on the festival. So before the festival, no one thought about eating that animal on the festival. So says Rabbi Shimon, that animal is muktzah. You can't touch that animal. You can't do anything with that animal. It wasn't prepared for use on the festival, so you can't do anything with it. So according to Rabbi Shimon, it should just sit there, right? Certainly you can't slaughter it, right? It's not prepared for use so that you could slaughter it on the festival. Can you raise it up out of the well? Even according to Rabbi Shimon, we're not sure yet. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon actually disagree? If we say that they disagree about whether or not one may examine blemishes on a festival, such that Rabbi Yehuda holds that one may examine blemishes on a festival, and Rabbi Shimon holds that one may not examine blemishes on a festival, well, if so, let them disagree with regard to examining blemishes in general on a festival, and not only with respect to this particular case of a bechor, a firstborn, that fell into a cistern. Right, so there might be already a disagreement about whether we may examine blemishes on a festival. Why would we not examine blemishes on a festival? Here's a note from Rav Steinsaltz. Various reasons have been suggested for the prohibition against examining firstborns on a festival. It is prohibited to examine firstborns on a festival. In the Jerusalem Talmud, a view is cited that the dispute relates to the law that an expert must examine and permit the firstborn. If it's a firstborn, it's automatically not permitted. It's prohibited to be eaten. It has to go to Jerusalem. It has to be sacrificed on the altar, and then what's left over is going to be eaten by the priest. To say that it has a blemish and therefore it's going to be disqualified with the altar and it's going to be permitted to be eaten in its entirety by people can only happen after an expert says, yes, that has the blemish, that is just disqualifies it for the altar. It can only be done by an expert. Can you bring an expert to make that determination on a festival? That's prohibited, and we're discussing why. According to Rabbi Shimon, the expert's examination is regarded like the rendering of judgment, and that is what permits the firstborn. And so the examination is prohibited on a festival, right? He can't make a judgment like that. He can't change its status from prohibited to permitted on the festival. Whereas in Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the blemish itself renders the firstborn permitted, and the expert's decision is a mere clarification and confirmation of that status without any real judgment taking place. The blemish, it's the blemish that renders the animal permitted. The expert is just going to say, yes, it's blemish, but it was from the time it was blemish, it was permitted on the festival. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, or Rabbi Shimon is saying, no, it is not permitted until the expert comes and says, yes, that's a blemish, and at that moment it becomes permitted, right? Whereas the other view is that it was permitted as soon as the blemish developed, and it's only retroactively clarified by the expert opinion. Where am I? Of that status, without any judgment taking place. The Ra'avad suggests two other reasons for this stringency, not allowing experts to examine firstborns on a festival. First, if it turns out that the firstborn does not have a blemish, one will have moved a muktzah object on a festival, right? In other words, to examine the animal, you might have to pick it up, look around it, and now that animal was muktzah. You shouldn't be touching it all on the festival. In order to do the examination, you are touching it and moving it around, and if it turns out that it wasn't blemished, then you moved a muktzah object, and you shouldn't have done that. You violated a rabbinic ordinance. Second, there is a concern that the expert might be overly lenient in his judgment so that there will be food for the joy of the festival. There's a lot of pressure. Hey, this family lost what was going to be its meal, but there's this bechor, which seems like it's blemish. It's blemish, right? Right, sir? It's blemish, right? If you say that it's blemish, then we're all going to have what to celebrate with at our festival. But if you say that it's unblemished, then yeah, we're going to be with no meat. So he might be a little bit pressured to issue a lenient ruling. And that's another reason why they prohibit this. In the Migdal Oz, it is explained that the reason for the stringent ruling is that drunkenness is common on a festival, which might lead the expert to make a mistake in his judgment. And the Rambam, Maimonides, explains that the blemishes of sacred animals may not be examined on a festival because if the sage rules that an animal is permitted, the owner might slaughter it on the festival, even though it is muktzah. Right? So even though it now is said to be permitted, okay, well, it's permitted to the priests. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to, set up to make that exchange with the priest, or he's going to sell it, the whole deal is going to be made. It's just, it's permitted for a priest to slaughter it and eat it, right? But the person might jump the gun and slaughter it himself, who's the person who's not a priest, the owner of the animal. Right, and the law on this is examining blemishes on a festival. One may not examine the blemishes of a firstborn on a festival. And the law is ruled in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, based on the conclusion of this Gemara that we're reading now. A firstborn that fell into a cistern. Where does this argument end up? If an unblemished firstborn falls into a cistern on a festival, one may not raise it from the cistern, but one may feed it where it is so that, it should survive its ordeal there. Even if one transgresses this prohibition and brings the animal up, why is that being discussed? Because, you might feel sorry for the animal and be like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going to take it out of the well. I don't want that animal to suffer. Okay, so you violated the rabbinic ordinance and then you shouldn't raise it up. But now that you did, that doesn't mean that it now becomes permitted to slaughter it. You shouldn't have taken it up. If you did, that action is not going to render it permitted for slaughtering and eating. All right, let's get back to the Gemara. Okay, so the Gemara suggested, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, what do they really disagree about? Are they disagreeing in general that you may not examine a bechor on a festival? If so, why are they talking about this case of the animal that fell into a cistern? And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to teach the disagreement with regard to the case of a firstborn that fell into a cistern, as it could enter your mind to say that because of the matter of the suffering of living creatures, one should employ an artifice to circumvent the law and raise the animal from the cistern. And this would be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, who states elsewhere, we'll come to it on page 37 of this tractate, with regard to a different case, that one may employ an artifice in order to rescue an animal that fell into a cistern on a festival. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon disagree even in the case of a firstborn that fell into a cistern. And the Gemara asks, if so, if the Mishnah mentions the case of a firstborn that fell into a cistern in order to teach that an artifice may not be employed to raise the animal from the cistern, the phrase, like what would be an artifice? This is not the example, but just thinking out loud, like a type of artifice. This is not what they're thinking about, but imagine you want to get that animal out of the cistern. That's a place where there's drinking water, right? So maybe you lower your bucket just to get some water out of the cistern. It's in private property, so you're not going to be transferring from private to public domain. The well and the private domain are one. So maybe you're just lifting water out of the well, and if the animal, small enough to grab onto the bucket and come out with it, so much the better, but you didn't lift the animal out, that would be using an artifice to save the animal. But that's not going to render it permitted for slaughtering and eating on the festival. Right, so if it is so that the Mishnah mentions the case of a firstborn that fell into a cistern in order to teach that an artifice may not be employed to raise the animal from the cistern, the phrase, he may not slaughter it, is inaccurate. Rather, it should have said, he may not raise the animal and slaughter it. Right? We remember that Rabbi Yehuda said he may raise it and slaughter it. Rabbi Shimon said he may not slaughter it. Why doesn't Rabbi Shimon say he may not raise it and slaughter it? And the Gemara answers, no, this teaching is necessary in a case where he transgressed the prohibition on raising the animal, and he already raised it out of the cistern, as it could enter your mind to say that he may now slaughter it. Therefore, the Mishnah teaches us that even then he may not do so. Now, the Gemara expresses wonder at this answer. How could one think that he may now slaughter it? Isn't the animal unblemished? How could one imagine that it is permitted to slaughter a firstborn that is unblemished? And the Gemara answers, this teaching is necessary only in a case where it developed a blemish after it fell into the well. And the Gemara challenges this argument, but how could one think that he may now slaughter the animal? Doesn't it fall into the category of muksa, as it was not fit to be eaten on the eve of the festival, since at that time it was still unblemished? If it developed its blemish during the festival, well, then we know we can't eat it on the festival because it was not prepared for use on the festival, because before the festival started, it was an unblemished firstborn, therefore automatically consecrated and not available for slaughtering and eating. Rather, the Mishnah is speaking of a case, and I am almost done, so get your comments and questions in. Rather, the Mishnah is speaking of a case where the animal developed a temporary blemish, one that might eventually heal on the eve of the festival, and now, after falling, it has a permanent blemish. Lest you say that his mind was set on the animal as food already before the festival due to the temporary blemish, and therefore he should now be allowed to slaughter it now that it has a permanent blemish. The Mishnah teaches us that since it was not fit to be eaten before the festival, it is not considered prepared for use on the festival. Rather, it falls into the category of muksa, and it may not be slaughtered. So what is the law about animals that because then another question will come up, and I'm not going to get into it because it gets pretty technical, but a question will come up, what if the animal was born during the festival? Now you would say, well, if it was born during the festival, how could it possibly be prepared for use on the festival, right? It didn't exist before the festival. But its mother was a kosher animal that the person could have, designated in his mind or with an action to say, oh, the mother, I'm going to slaughter that animal and then, butcher it, roast it, and eat it during the festival. And if you slaughter a pregnant goat or a pregnant sheep or a pregnant cow, and you find, a fetal cow, sheep, or goat inside it, you can eat it because it's considered part of the mother. So while it was inside the mother on the eve of the festival, it was considered prepared for use to eat it. Then it was born on the festival. At that moment, it was a firstborn male of that female, and it became prohibited. It's consecrated, it's a bechor, and now it cannot be eaten. It was prepared for use, then it was born, it cannot be eaten because it's a firstborn. But if it emerged when it was born with a disqualifying blemish, then maybe it was always fit for use, and as soon as it's born and has that blemish, an expert could be right there and see it born, say that's a disqualifying blemish, and then it could be slaughtered on the festival. What is the law of this? If it developed a blemish after birth, if a firstborn animal was born on a festival, and later that day it developed a blemish, so when it was born, it was unblemished, and its owner unlawfully showed that animal to a sage, unlawfully because you don't examine blemishes to determine if the animal is fit for the altar or not. You don't do that on the festival. But if the owner showed it to an expert, the expert happened to be at his table, he said, hey, look at this, is this a permanent blemish or not? The expert should have said, we don't examine blemishes, but he gave an opinion, then what? And that sage permitted the animal, said it is permitted, that is a disqualifying blemish, then it may be slaughtered on the festival. None of that should have happened, but it did happen, so after the fact, now the animal is permitted. However, some authorities prohibit it because it shouldn't have been examined in the first place. And if it was born with its blemish, if a firstborn animal was born on a festival with a blemish, and its owner unlawfully showed it to a sage who permitted it, he may proceed to slaughter it. It shouldn't have been shown to a sage, but it was, so after the fact, it is rendered permitted. Last quick idea, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, the Mishna is also precise in its wording according to the opinion that no blemish may be examined ab initio, meaning you can't examine the blemishes, but if you do, then you might be able to change the status and render it permitted and it can be slaughtered on the festival. As the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Shimon says, even if the animal has a blemish, it is prohibited to slaughter it, since any firstborn animal whose blemish is not perceptible before the festival began is not considered to be among the animals prepared prior to the festival for use on the festival. What is the meaning of the phrase, whose blemish is not perceptible, right before the festival began? If we say that its blemish is not perceptible at all, well, it is obvious. Need it be said that an animal whose blemish was not perceptible at all prior to the festival is not considered prepared for use on the festival? Of course it's not prepared for use. Rather, one must say that the animal had a perceptible blemish, but it was not shown to a sage before the festival began to determine whether it was a permanent blemish or a temporary blemish. In any event, the Mishnah teaches us it is not considered to be among the animals prepared prior to the festival for use on the festival, which indicates that it is not considered prepared even after the fact, after it gets examined. It follows that the allowance granted in the case of a firstborn that was born with a blemish is also only after the fact, but the blemish may not be examined in the first place. And the Gemara concludes, indeed, learn from it that it is so. Okay, that's what I've got today. Let us check comments and questions. Yosef, the goat falling in the cistern sounds like a pikuach nefesh issue. I wonder if that's where we will end up in this daf. You would think so, but generally, when we talk about pikuach nefesh, right, saving a life, we're talking about human lives, right? So there's tremendous respect in Torah law for animals, to avoid the suffering of animals. We have a law that before we're allowed to sit and eat, we have to make sure that our animals are fed. So the dignity of animals, the life of animals, is of tremendous concern. But they are not on the same level as humans, and the Torah will always make that distinction. And so while we will, desecrate Shabbos to save a human life, I'm about 99.9999999% sure that we will not desecrate Shabbos to save an animal's life. Now, a person, who's very attached to an animal might just say, well, I don't care, I'm going to save my animal. and that's a choice that he made. But he did desecrate Shabbos, right? And if the temple were standing, he would be liable to bring a sin offering. He can make an atonement for that. But we're not going to say that it's permitted. It's not permitted. And pekuach nefesh applies to saving human lives. Tom Beck, won't giving permission after the fact possibly lead to accidentally on purpose? That is the question that's always in play when we're talking about, these rulings that, well, you shouldn't have done it in the first place, but if you did it, the fact is, legally speaking, you change the status of the animal and it's going to become permitted, only in certain cases and not in others. Now, on some of those, the rabbis will say, well, even though technically it would work, that it should have been ab initio you're prohibited, after the fact you did it, now the status has changed, but as a rabbinic ordinance, we're going to say it remains prohibited because you shouldn't have done that, and we want to make a policy that will prevent people from doing accidentally on purpose. And sometimes they do that. And in other cases, they're not really that concerned because it's a rare occurrence. The animal in the well, for example, that's not going to happen every day. It's not something we really have to worry about. No one's going to throw the animal in the well accidentally on purpose. More like, are they going to save the animal, pull it out of the well? So where it's not something that happens commonly enough that they should be concerned that an extra rabbinic ordinance is needed, where that concern isn't that great, they won't issue the ordinance because it's better not to issue new laws unless they're truly necessary. That's what I've got for us tonight. It's been great to be learning with you here in the Litvak Sukkah. We won't have class tomorrow because it's Erev Shmini Atzeret. During Hoshana Raba, it's Erev Shmini Atzeret. So by tomorrow night, we'll be preparing for the 8th day of Sukkot, its own festival, Shmini Atzeret. The next day after that is the full festival day, the 2nd day of Shmini Atzeret, also known as Simchas Torah. So our next class will be when we come out of the festival, out of Simchas Torah, on Wednesday night, God willing. Simchas Torah can be really exhausting and hard to prepare a class. So I hope to be able to teach Wednesday night, and we'll have a 3-day makeup for the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday pages. If not, it'll be on Thursday. But hopefully we'll be together again on Wednesday night. For those celebrating the holiday, have a beautiful, beautiful Hoshana Raba, Shmini Atzeret, and Simchas Torah. Hag Sameach.